Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar, Build It Right, Permatex Products in Engine Building. My name is Amanda Goyette. I'm an admin assistant with AERA, and I will be moderating today's event with my colleague, Rob Monroe.
Hey, everyone. Yeah, Rob Monroe here. I look after membership and technical development at AERA, and I want to welcome you to today's webinar. And another new thing that we've got for PRI this year is the Engine Professional Industry Conference. So it's EPIC, and we thought that name kind of fit, really kind of just perfect with the actual full name of it. So there's going to be 4 really high-level technical presentations for EPIC, and it's the Wednesday before PRI starts. It includes breakfast. You're going to get lunch with it, and you do need to sign up for that as well. It's only $50, and if you sign up, again, you get the full conference, you get the breakfast, you get the lunch. You can go out to our website. All the information is there, as well as, like I say, Amanda put in the handout section of the control panel. There is the brochure there for EPIC, and you can also sign up that way. So looking forward to seeing everybody there at that one. That's going to be a really, really good bunch of technical presentations. The other thing that we got that we're giving away at PRI this year is our engine professional, our engines. So it's the EREF engine giveaway. Last year, you might remember we did the flathead Ford. This year, we're doing a 565 cubic inch big block, and this thing's supercharged. So this thing's absolutely going to be a beast. And it's the tickets are 10 for $20. You can go and grab tickets. You don't have to be at the PRI show to win this. You don't have to be present. You can literally just buy your tickets. We're shipping this engine anywhere within the continental U.S. for free once you win it. So this is a great deal. This is going to look really, really good in somebody's vehicle. And this engine is really, really sweet. So again, you can go out to aera.org and grab tickets for that engine, 10 for $20. And that engine will be on display at PRI. So we'll look forward to seeing that there. What I'll do now, that's enough out of me, is I'm going to bring on Anthony Mondi from Permatex. And Anthony is a technical trainer and support specialist at Permatex. Really excited to have him today. Their products are something that we all use in the shop, every day. And Anthony's going to do a really good job of covering just some tips and tricks and how to use those products and when to use them. So, Anthony, how are things going today?
Oh, things are going pretty good. Thanks for having me. Let's get into this. So, a little bit of background on me. I've been working on cars for 34 years, professionally for 28. I was an automotive instructor at Universal Technical Institute for 18 years. Credentials, ASE Master Certified, L1 Advanced Engine Performance, former Toyota Certified T10 instructor. And for the last 9 years, I've been a crew member on the Follow a Dream NHRA Top Alcohol Funny Car. I've done a lot of different things in the industry in my career. And really, the funny car is one of the most fun ones that I get to do. So today, we're going to go over gasket makers, anaerobic compounds, and some of our rebuilders aids. Like Rob said earlier, that's products that a lot of us have used over the years, but over time, things change. Therefore, we need a little updating. When you're building an engine, there are things that you know and things you need to learn. I'm sure, over the years, you look at the way engines have changed from flathead to cam and block and overhead cam engines. There's a lot of things that are very similar, but they also have a lot of differences and things that the first time you work on them, you need to learn. So just like our products, have changed over the years, we just want to let you know, what is available and ways that it can help you seal your engine, help everything go together, correctly, and just, make both the engine builder and the engine owner happy. So RTV gasket makers, one of the things we always get is people saying, I like to use pre-cut gaskets. All right, well, why? So we look at the pros, they're exact fit. There's no real cleanup. Some of them we'll leave behind a little thing to clean up, but usually it's nothing big. OEM uses them. They're easy to install. easy to remove, normally won't affect the sensors, and when you're billing a customer, you have a physical part. The cons is difficult to keep in place. So I always use a water pump gasket that, if you're working in the car itself, it can be a little bit trickier to hold that in place when you're putting the water pump in. You can over torque gaskets. The cork gaskets, you see that a lot with where people just, they make them tight and then they make them tighter. And then it can actually create its own problems. Risk of getting bent or wrinkled. That can be expensive. And over the past couple of years, we've run into situations where they weren't in stock for a while. Now, why do people use chemical gaskets? Multi-use, works in most applications, works on imperfect surfaces, can give you a better seal. If you have a tube on hand, it's good for a year or two. Higher success rates. They're less expensive than most cut gaskets. Long lasting, so it can last the life of the vehicle. What are some of the cons? Well, they're messy to use. You put silicone on a component and you can turn around and bump your arm into it, and now you have it all over the place. Most of them are going to be hard to remove. Then there's also the cure time. So time you have to wait while the gasket, gets completely set. And then the big one the mistake most people make is using way too much. It is way too easy to do that. So, when you look at the difference between the two, now, you have some pros and cons between them, and then you weigh your options to determine which ones you want to use. So when using a gasket maker, you have to understand what it is. So a gasket maker is an extremely thick RTV silicone that takes the place of the gasket. We recommend using between a 16th to a quarter of an inch in diameter bead. Now, with that said, usually an 1/8 inch bead is sufficient for most applications. So, this is where people, definitely use too much, is in the bead that they put on, which is the reason why a lot of people will say, well, I don't like to use them because it squeezes all out and, can get caught up in the oil pump pickup on an oil pan, or it can get caught in the transmission. It can get caught in any of the components. Well, if you don't use too much, that risk is a lot less. Now, over the years, we went from an acetasi RTV to an oxime RTV, which changed the procedure as far as how you're supposed to use these. With the older acetasi, you would let it skin over and then put them together. Well, now, what we recommend is once you put this RTV onto the component, assemble the parts, bolting them up finger tight to ensure contact is established while the silicone is still wet. Then we recommend letting it sit for about an hour and then torque all the fasteners to proper values based off of the vehicle's service manual. Now, after that, it's recommended to let it sit for 24 hours for curing purposes, and then fill with any necessary fluids and return the vehicle to service. Now, when it comes to the 24-hour cure time, that's where a lot of people will come in to complain about, well, I don't have that kind of time. Well, we'll talk about that in a little more details coming up. But we understand that that's where most people have a complaint about gasket makers, or the RTV gasket makers. Now, another thing I've seen people do, and I've even done it myself for testing purposes, was filling the channel on a valve cover gasket that has an O-ring style rubber gasket. And we don't recommend doing that because what happens is RTV needs air and moisture to cure. And when I put it in that big channel, what happens is I'll get air and moisture to some of it, but not all of it necessarily. So you can run into a curing problem where it will take a lot longer to cure internally, or it may not even cure at all. Now, another thing that I know I've done in the past, and a lot of people tend to do, is putting an RTV silicone on a cut gasket. Well, it might have worked back then, but now the gasket it actually will create a potential for leaking, as it won't allow it to seal correctly on either end of it. Now, if we're going to seal areas that hold oil, you know, we have our black gasket makers, what we recommend for that. Now, our black RTV gasket makers are designed for contact with oil and flexibility. So oil resistance and flexibility are the two main things that this gasket maker is designed for. So, an oil pan, a timing cover, a valve cover, that is our oil resistance ones. Now, thermal expansion rates between dissimilar metals can also create issues as they expand and contract at different rates. You can actually have the RTV moving back and forth, and the black gasket maker is designed with the flexibility needed to keep that from leaking. So if I'm using a stamped steel oil pan to either a cast iron or an aluminum block, or an aluminum oil pan to a cast iron block, those are some situations where I want that flexibility due to the dissimilar metals. Now, when we look at, creating that area for this, we have three different versions of our black gasket maker. We have our ultra black, which is our standard. That is temperature resistance is good to 500 degrees Fahrenheit. We have our Optimum, which is our best formula. And then we have the right stuff, which is our fastest return to service. So I call this one our professional line. This is designed for the technicians that need to get this thing out now. So we have the right stuff in two versions there. We have 1 minute and 90 minute. The 1 minute is immediate return to service. The 90 minute is return to service within 90 minutes. Now, as engines have become smaller, we usually see the need for higher RPMs to get enough airflow through them to create the power and efficiency, that we require in modern cars. So that's going to create a heavier load on the engine, and a lot of times will create more internal vibrations. This will create a unique situation when sealing the engine. You add a supercharger or turbocharger to overcome the lack of engine displacement. We are now creating higher internal pressures in the engine, most notably cylinder pressure, which, if it leaks through, can create crankcase pressure. So we need gaskets that are able to help us with that. And for that, we have our gray gasket makers. Our gray gasket makers are designed to handle the higher torque loads and rigidity, be resistant to the high vibrations, work well with smaller, higher revving engines, and can also be used where similar metals are used, such as an aluminum timing cover and an aluminum engine, aluminum valve covers with an aluminum cylinder head, and intake manifolds. And it also has good high water glycol resistance. Now, some pictures here of an intake manifold, thermostat housing, and once again, our gray has good temperature resistance up to 500 degrees Fahrenheit. Our Optimum gray, though, has our second highest temperature resistance of 700 degrees Fahrenheit. So not only does it is it good in those scenarios where we have similar metals and higher revving? It also is very good on the temperature resistance. And then we have our right stuff, which is good for 500. Now, high heat. With modern engines running at higher temperatures than the older engines on a consistent basis, you need a gasket for the high temperature areas, that will be able to handle that heat and the amount of heat cycling it's going to go through. So when we look at the options, a lot of times, especially on the exhaust side of the vehicle, we have steel, multi-layered steel, coated steel, composite, graphite, and dead soft aluminum. One of the major problems we tend to have with high temperature areas is potential for warpage. I know using headers, on the 3-bolt flanges, I've seen over the years that no matter what gasket you use, you get through enough heat cycles and it's warped. So you want to make sure that you choose a good gasket design that will be able to deal with that kind of warpage and still seal. Our red gasket makers are designed to resist aging, weathering, and thermal cycling without hardening, shrinking, or cracking. Handle higher temperature environments such as headers, exhaust manifolds, turbo flanges, slip fit, and exhaust, and also be sensor safe and non-corrosive, so it won't harm catalytic converters on the cars since the 70s that still have them. Now, our ultra red is good up to 650 degrees Fahrenheit, which is our third highest temp. The Optimum red is our highest temperature resistant, up to 750 degrees Fahrenheit, which is higher than our ultra copper gasket maker and traditional red gasket makers. And the right stuff red is good up to 650, but will cure faster. So, we always try and break this down into the pros of our, gasket makers and the different versions. So we look at our Ultra series. See, that's our most economical line. Offers high flexibility, high oil resistance for the black. The gray is high rigidity and vibration. The red high temp is good for up to 650 degrees Fahrenheit. Recently, we just unveiled our new Optimum formula, which is our easy disassembly. So easy disassembly it's our best formula with the 24-hour cure time. Now, personally, having done some of the research and development on this as far as the testing goes, is we put it on 2 vehicles and a test engine, and we've run them through heat cycles and put mileage on them, and then basically took it back apart to see how did this come off. And what we got was it separates very easily and it was faster. So if you're using the Ultra, you're going to have to do more scraping to clean. The right stuff, you're going to have to do a lot more scraping. But with the Optimum Easy Disassembly, you can, for the most part, get a lot of it off with just your finger. And being our best formula, it will have the maximum of everything. So our black would be maximum flexibility and oil resistance, the gray rigidity, maximum torque load and vibration resistance, and the red is maximum temperature resistant. Now, our right stuff, 90-minute, second fastest return to service. Right stuff, 1 minute, fastest return to service. When we're working on the funny car, we use the right stuff 1 minute because when we're taking it apart and putting it back together, normally, it's in between qualifying rounds or elimination rounds. And so anything we take apart like that we need to reseal, we want it to seal as quickly as possible. And that's why we use the 1 minute. So this way, as we put it back together, it's ready to go. put the fluids in it, we can start it up, we can take it out and run it at the track, down the track, and hope everything goes well. Now, water pump and thermostat housing gasket maker. This is a gasket maker that we designed that is designed to handle modern coolants, the HOT, and have evolved since they changed the mixtures. We need something that is designed to be compatible with, all the additives and all that. So this way it will help seal and not allow it to leak. Now, best practices is to apply continuous bead of silicone around to the mating surface. My personal preference is I like to go on the inside of the bolt holes and just make that continuous bead all the way around the inside. So therefore, I don't have any way that an oil or a coolant or any fluid, there's very little possibility for it to be able to find a passageway through. Then I will go and touch around the outer side of the bolt holes to, just as a backup. Now, assemble the parts, let it sit for an hour and torque it. Now, the 24-hour cure time, that's for a full cure. We also deal with a thing called blowout time. Blowout time is, how long does that RTV gasket maker need to sit before, to limit the amount of chance of, if you put the fluids in early, of it creating a leak and blowing out. And our 24-hour cure time of our Optimum and the Ultra, they both have an 8-hour blowout time. So at 8 hours, we say that it has a reasonable expectation for it to seal. Now, we won't say that, hey, that's the best time, just throw it in there then. We're going to recommend letting it sit. So if you're building an engine that is going to be sitting for a day or two, there's no problem with that. We do recommend that if you are going to put it together and throw fluids in it and run it, that you should probably look into the right stuff. Now, gasket sealants. So gasket sealants are normally thin, often non-setting, non-hardening, non-brittle. They are designed to go onto a gasket itself, a cut gasket itself. So a cork gasket, a paper gasket, a rubber gasket, a metal gasket, and what it's going to do is help that gasket seal better. Some of those gaskets are very good on their own, but adding that gasket sealant is going to help take up a little bit extra space. So if there is a little bit of a warpage or a gouge in the flange that you're using, it can help seal that up. And once again, you don't need a lot. A thin coating over the surface will allow you to get that sealing without creating any issues. So some of the different gasket makers we have are Gasket Shellac, and Gasket Shellac is a slow-drying, hard-setting gasket sealant. It's been around for, really for just about forever. And one of its downsides is its low temperature, only up to like 350 degrees, which helps it, seal, threaded and hose connections, low pressure connections that, may see fuel, oil, or coolant. High-Tack is an all-purpose fast-drying gasket sealant that remains tacky and can withstand up to 500 degrees Fahrenheit. This is probably the one I have the most experience with. I really liked using High-Tack on water pump gaskets because that would allow me to put that on there and then actually stick the gasket to the water pump and have it stay. So I didn't have to worry about juggling a couple bolts and trying to maneuver everything in there to get it on there. But like I said, that's the one I've had the most experience with. I've used most. Form-A-Gasket comes in a few varieties. Some are fast drying, some are hard setting, some are slow drying, some are non-hardening. We have, 4 different versions of our Form-A-Gaskets. So, this is one of those that they all do things similar but slightly different also. So this is one of those that I recommend if you want to use a Form-A-Gasket that you do some research, go to our website, look up the Form-A-Gasket you think you may want to use, and then click on the TDS or technical data sheet. And that'll give you some more insight as to how that particular Form-A-Gasket will work. I'm very big on researching things, and if you're concerned on something will fit your needs, do some research on it. Look for a technical data sheet, no matter what company and what product you're using. Copper gasket sealant is fast drying metallic containing gasket sealant used to help dissipate heat, improve heat transfer, and prevent gasket burnout. So cylinder head gaskets, exhaust manifold gaskets, other high heat gaskets, this will help take up a little bit of that extra flange warpage or gouging. I know people have used them on steel head gaskets and copper head gaskets for a long time. So it's been used and has worked well for a long time. Polyester urethane gasket sealer is more commonly known as Hylamar, is a blue, non-saddening, non-hardening sealant. It resists fuel, oil, and coolant and fluorocarbon refrigerants. It makes it good for use with pre-cut gaskets for thread sealing and metal-to-metal contact. So it's one of those that you can put on there and be able to use it for that. So, here we have on the next slide, just some pictures and a visual of the products. And when it comes to the Form-A-Gaskets, just a little bit of some information like excellent for sealing, Form-A-Gasket number 1, excellent for sealing and securing freeze plugs. So, and permanent and rigid assembly, so something that's not going to be put in and out very often. We have Form-A-Gasket number 2, for hose fitting, stuff like that. And just some visuals to see where this could be used. Or copper spray gasket. And proper application with the high tack with the can and brush. What I would always do is I would make sure everything's clean. Then film a sealant. I would normally put it on one side of the gasket. Then I would put the gasket onto the water pump. And then I would put it on the other side of the gasket. They say allow the assembly to cure for non-hardenings for 4 hours, hardening for 8 hours, then fill with necessary fluids, return the vehicle to service. I've had a lot of people tell me that, well, I just put it on there, and once I put it back together, I put the fluids in it, and it's worked fine. Great. I'm happy that works for you. One time it may not, but we're going to recommend our times anyway. And most people are going to use it as they see fit. Anaerobic compounds. So anaerobic means without oxygen. So an anaerobic compound is going to need absence of air as part of its curing process. We have an active metal and that absence of air. That is going to create the polymerization, which is also known as curing. So when you look at a bottle of an anaerobic compound, you will see that it has some air in the bottom. So kind of like your potato chips, there's air in the top. But with anaerobic compounds, that air is what we use to make sure that it will stay a liquid, because when it's exposed to air, it will not cure at all. So to the right of that bottle, you'll see that when you have the anaerobic compound on the metal, it's not going to do a whole lot. When you start putting the other component on, and we have two active metals, then we're going to start to see that the curing process. As you bolt it up and you start to remove the air, the process really gets underway, and we have molecular movement. The electrons are flowing around, so this way it will create a strong thermoset plastic seal when it is completed. Now, active or inactive metals. What metal do you have? Well, this little chart here helps with that. On the super active side, we have brass, copper, bronze, and aluminum alloy. Active, we have steel, nickel, iron, and manganese. And inactive, we have anodized surfaces, pure aluminum, chrome-plated metals, galvanized steel, zinc, cadmium, titanium, and stainless steel. So the next question is, do I need an activator? Well, what is an activator? An activator, or a surface conditioner, is going to clean the surface and prepare it so this way it can increase the anaerobic adhesive's ability to fixture and cure. This can make the process happen faster. And it can also make the bond stronger. So if I have a less active or non-active metal, it will actually give me the ability to have it cure. So when I'm going to use an anaerobic gasket maker, I look at the metals I have. If, say, I have an aluminum water pump with aluminum water pump housing area. Or if I use a anaerobic gasket maker and I use the activator with it, what the activator is going to do is going to prepare that metal to actually create the process that will cure the anaerobic gasket maker. So even though aluminum alloy is a good active metal, if I have that activator, it will create a stronger bond and help it cure faster. So if I'm sealing rigid assembly and I use anaerobic gasket maker, I can seal up to a maximum gap of 15 thousandths of an inch. So this will be great for transmission cases and halves and transmission covers, gear cases, pump housings, surfaces commonly machined at tight tolerances, split crankcase engines, and the modern 2.4 liter Honda, I know, has basically I'll call it a big main cap girdle, where the lower end of the block has the main caps, as part of it. And if I were to use something other than that, I can actually change my bearing tolerances, which we really don't want. So using an anaerobic will allow me to keep those bearing tolerances as close to what the factory wants without having to make changes to the bearings themselves. Now, flange sealants are used in areas that we have a flange area that sticks up. And we have two versions of that. We have our standard anaerobic flange sealant, which is good to 300 degrees Fahrenheit, and we'll seal that about 15 thousandths of an inch. And the high temperature anaerobic flange sealant, which is a good choice where we will need to see a temperature resistance of up to 400 degrees Fahrenheit, and we can actually seal a gap up to 20 thousandths when using that activator. And so it'll create, allows us to use high clamping loads for strong leak-proof assemblies. So here we have a chart that will talk about the different gasket types or different gasket types needed, whether we're going to make or seal a gasket, and which would be some of the products that are available to be used in that application. So we go through all our gasket sealants, our RTV gasket makers, and our anaerobic compounds that could be used for gasket sealing. Now we'll talk about retaining compounds. Retaining compounds are anaerobic retaining adhesives used to secure components to shafts or housings. It can create up to 100% contact in between two surfaces, which can help reduce or eliminate fretting and corrosion. It can also even out load and stress distribution over the connection. So you can use an activator to help increase the time or decrease the time frame, and spray the activator. Our surface prep actually has copper, which is a very active metal. So that's going to help create that process faster. Spray it with the activator, let it dry for 3 to 5 minutes. Put your retaining compound on and put the components together. So in this case, the pictures are of a bearing going onto a shaft. We can also use them for press fit applications and shrink fit applications. So press fit, use the activator, and you can put the retaining compound on the inside or outside and then press it together. Shrink fit application, you use your method and use your activator and the compound, retaining compound, and allow the shrink fit to occur. We also have high temperature sleeve retainers. So high temperature sleeve retainers harden into a tough plastic material. And if you're installing a cylinder sleeve, it can help seal the lower end, for coolant flowing through the block, and also help to hold that sleeve in place. Now, when we look at the sleeve retainer, how well it holds, it has up to 3,000 psi holding power, and it's temperature resistant up to 400 degrees Fahrenheit. And it confirms to ASTM D5363, AN 0411, and the military R 46082 Type 2 standards. So there are a lot of companies out there that will recommend them for using retaining compounds for different items, like Cummins Inc. and Darton Sleeves, Iron Tight Products, Polaris Industries, Rosewood Diesel Tools, all recommend use of retaining compounds for multiple uses, whether it's cylinder sleeves, diesel injector sleeves, valve seats, for different items. Now, other companies will say they're not necessary. If your machine work is done correctly, that the correct fit will be there. And that's not something we would argue. But what the benefits of a retaining compound is it can allow for slightly relaxed tolerances of the connection. So if your tolerances are slightly towards the outer edge of the number, what this is going to do is allow us to have a better contact area between the two components. So the sleeve and the block, the valve seat and the cylinder head, stuff like that. Allow us to have better load transmission, which reduce stress and increase part life. It will reduce the chance for vibration due to uneven weight distribution, movement between splines and key weights. So if I'm dealing with bearings or spline shafts that we can help reduce vibrations, and it will help reduce or eliminate corrosion from fretting in the environment. So it helps seal things up a little bit and not allow corrosion to get in certain applications. So lastly, we'll talk about some different items we have for engine rebuilding that may or may not be something that you're familiar with. So, engine assembly lube. Why do we need engine assembly lube? Well, during the initial startup of a fresh engine, the metal-to-metal contact creates friction. Friction creates heat, and heat that comes with that friction can create havoc in certain areas of the engine. The bearings, the camshaft, lifters, push rods, rocker arms, parts that we need lubricated until engine oil reaches them. Your assembly lube should be soluble in oil and not affect the viscosity. Now, the picture on the left is of a rod cap for the funny car engine. We've been using the Permatex assembly lube for years when we put bearings in, whether it's a main bearing or a rod bearing. And actually, one thing that we normally do is you actually use the assembly lube on the bolts themselves as a lubricant. And we use Bill Miller engineering rods. Bill Miller is very particular with the lubrication that is used on the bolts that you torque inside his rods. So a number of years ago, he was talking with our engine builder, and he said that he does that. And we offered to send him a bottle so he could test it to see if it was a compatible lubricant that he would approve of for us to use to torque the bolts in his connecting rods. And he approved it. He said he didn't notice anything different between our assembly lube and the other oils that he had tested that he approved of. So for us, that's a win because we have that readily available when we're working on that engine. So we continue to do that to this day, even when we're just doing our normal maintenance, is we will lube it up and we will, put it on the bolts, put it between the washers on the bolts, and put it on the bearings. We'll lube the camshaft up, the lifters, and the rocker arms and all that stuff, just to make sure that we have, the correct lube for what we're trying to do. Now, some parts like flat tappet cams also need a lubricant for proper break-in. As the engine turns, the lifter spins on the cam lube. Without proper lubrication, it will ruin the cam lifter. The break-in procedure for roller lifters is also similar. So, putting this lube on the cam is also something that is acceptable. We also have Prussian blue, which is a non-drying blue, oily paste-type pigment designed to identify points of interference and high spots on precision parts to be fitted. It can help speed tracing and precision fitting to close tolerance assemblies. Makes them proper fitting high spots immediately visible as they are bright blue streaks. So if you're looking at using it to find out how your valves in your cylinder head are, how good is the contact between the two, and is it sealing correctly? You could use this. You can actually use it to check your gears for your gear setup. And we also have valve grinding compound. So odorless gray paste containing selective abrasive grits dispersed in a water-based non-corrosive binder composed of gelling agents, lubricants, preservatives, and ethylene glycol. So this is another thing that we'll use at the racetrack if we have a valve that's not sealing correctly, we can put some valve grinding compound in there. We can lap the valves and make sure that we now have a good seal. We ran into this actually not that long ago. We had two valves that were leaking on the same cylinder, took the cylinder head off, used it, and we were able to seal it back up. So, and then you can use your Prussian blue to help check and make sure that it's sealing very well too. Now, over the past few years, we've actually started our own training website called permatextraining.com. We have actually two different types of training out there. We have our pro tips, which are normally a smaller video that is mostly consists of individual products, such as if you need to know about a red gasket maker, we have a course on just red gasket maker. If you want to know about our orange thread locker, we have a course on just that. We also have an extended course, which is about an hour long and has a quiz at the end of it. And for instructors, this is a good way to get an hour of ASE educational training, technical training hours. Right now, we have adhesives and sealants, selecting applying the right gasket maker, and selecting applying the right thread locker. We are looking to, update and put a couple more out there on the extended and the pro tip side. So if you've already signed up for it, keep an eye out for that. If not, if you do sign up, you'll see what's available and be able to learn some more about our product line. Our social media, we have our training website, we have Facebook, we have Instagram, YouTube, and Twitter. Our Instagram actually has a number of 1-minute tech tips that we have been putting out recently. So we should hopefully over the next 3 to 6 months have about 13 of them on there. So, tech tips are like, how do I get the silicone in the tube to not dry out in the entire tube? So we have a tech tip about that, using dielectric grease, using anaerobic gasket maker and stuff like that. So those things are there on our Instagram, and hopefully in the near future will be actually across all of our social media. And we also have on those some sponsored driver content that is some entertainment type stuff that goes along with our information. So a lot of good things there. I do have a QR code for our training website that you could just use, and that's really all I have now for this. I'm actually one more. We have our contact. If you have questions, prompts, concerns with the product, or want to recommend a product for us to make, you can go to our website, permatex.com, hit contact. There's a drop-down menu for product support, and you can let us know through there, and we will get back to you as soon as we can. So now we can open it up to questions.
Super. Thanks, Anthony. Great presentation. You can definitely see that it's not a case of where one product fits all. So there's a lot of good information there as to what product works. Especially, I really found it interesting that the temperature differences in the Ultra Series silicones. There's definitely, you got to get the right one to get the job correct. So there are some questions that have come in,
Okay.
and the first one is, which RTVs and sealers are compatible with various rubber compounds, such as like nitrile, Viton, and silicone?
Uh, we have a rubber gasket maker a rubber gasket sealer that is designed to work with the rubber style gaskets themselves. So if you have like an O-ring style gasket, or like a more of a rubber style like valve cover gasket or oil pan gasket, we do have a rubber gasket sealer that would be a good option for that. It's called Ultra
Okay.
Rubber Gasket Sealant and Dressing.
All right. Perfect. Next question that's come in is on an MLS gasket. They say they're told not to use any sealer like copper coat. Is that true?
Some of them, some of the manufacturers do recommend that you do not put anything because of the coatings that they use on the MLS gaskets. If the manufacturer tells you not to put anything on there, I'm not going to argue with them. I will say, I wouldn't do that just because, I don't know exactly what coatings they have on there, and I would follow their instructions. If you have one that doesn't say anything like that, then normally it may not have a coating that's going to matter.
Okay. All right. What product do you recommend for sealing bolts in threaded holes that go into coolant or oil?
All right, we have thread sealants, such as our high performance thread sealant or our high temperature thread sealant, that I would recommend to use to seal holes or through holes that go into a fluid passage. I would use the temperature range of the particular fluid. Like if I'm going into a coolant hole, I would probably use the high temperature. If I'm going into an oil passage type hole, I could use the high performance, which has a higher pressure rating than the high temperature one. So I would really determine it based off of the fluid that it's going to come in contact with.
Okay. All right. Another question for you, Anthony. They're asking what silicone sealant or product is compatible with Honda Bond?
Actually, most of our RTV gasket line is compatible with Honda Bond. Um, it's going to come down to, we have ours are designed specially for different areas, such as the oil resistance um, versus the vibration versus the high temp and all that. Where I think Honda Bond is generally recommended for most of those. Um, when our gray is probably our Optimum gray is probably the most like Honda Bond in the capabilities, um, as far as being able to handle some oil resistance, the high vibrations, and a higher temperature. Um, but we tend to specialize more in like the oil pan, use the black for like the timing cover on a Honda. For where the timing chain is, I would use the gray on the majority of it, but the black on the bottom where it meets contacts the pan, and stuff like that.
All right. Another question, Anthony. There's still a little bit of confusion between understanding between high tack and high molar. They seem redundant, but there must be a time when you use high tack versus high molar and vice versa.
Yeah.
Could you elaborate on that?
High Lamar is actually fuel resistant, where high tack isn't. Like I said, high tack is, I'll say, a general purpose. So I could use it on really any kind of gasket, like paper or cork gasket that I'm going to put on a valve cover. whether I'm going to put it on an oil pan or a water pump or a timing cover gasket. I can use it on any of those. Whereas the Hylamar or the polyester is more of a specific thing that's going to you can use it for oil and coolant, but the big thing about that is the fuel resistance. So something that's going to come in contact with fuel, it has more potential to come in contact with fuel. It's a better option. But I wouldn't put it on like carburetor gaskets or anything. That may be a little too much fuel. But that's normally I wouldn't do that. I'm sure there's some people may. We don't recommend it.
Okay. All right. Next question for you. Is non-hardening Permatex still in use? And if so, for what?
Yeah. Our non-hardening gasket sealants are still out there. We have our gasket sealers. We had that would be more in the Form-A-Gasket, the high-tack, the PermaShield, where not all of them, a couple of the Form-A-Gaskets don't harden, and a lot of it allows the removal to be a lot easier than if it hardens. It will seal, but also allow the gasket to be removed easier. A lot of it's just different particular uses based off of what the technical data sheets have a ton more information than I can give right now. So it's one of those that they're still out there. They can still be used on what they've been used on in the past. There may be one that's better than another for your particular application, which is where the technical data sheets come into play.
Okay, sounds good. Next one for you, Anthony, is this particular person is working on an old Plymouth flathead 6-cylinder from the 40s. The oil pan is leaking and has had old cork gaskets. They're wondering what new technology could be adapted to this style gasket to prevent leaks coming from the old cork replacement gaskets.
Okay, so you can use like a high tack, the gasket shellac, super high tack. There's a bunch of gasket sealers that you can put over that. And then what the gasket sealer is going to do is when you put it on top and on the bottom of that cork gasket, it's going to take the little nooks and crannies in the cork, and it's going to help seal those up so the oil doesn't get embedded into the cork and eventually find its way out. Another thing you could do is you can skip that altogether and go with like the Optimum black or any of our black gasket makers, and just use the black gasket maker in place of the gasket, and that will also get rid of that problem too.
All right. What is your best recommended gasket remover or process for aluminum or aluminum assemblies?
When you're dealing with a standard gasket maker, it's really going to be dependent on how easily it wants to come off in the beginning. Now, over the years, I've used metal scrapers, plastic scrapers, metal razor blades, plastic razor blades. If you can be extremely careful with trying to make sure that you don't gouge the aluminum, I could recommend using, the metal scraper or metal razor blade. Another trick I tend to use too is just a little bit of brake cleaner. Spray a little brake cleaner on it, and that will allow it to help break that down a little bit. I don't know of any silicone RTV gasket remover that is out there. We do have a gasket remover that is designed for anaerobics, um, which is one of these reasons why we came out with the new Optimum Easy Disassembly, was to make your life easier on that. But I just say, take it slow, little by little, and um, try not to gouge it. If you do gouge it, and you're using a cut gasket, definitely want to use a gasket sealer. If you're using an RTV silicone gasket maker, just make sure that you cover it up and you have it sealed well. But just take your time with, sometimes it's whatever means necessary, but you always want to use some non-marring type of material to remove it.
Sounds good. Well, that's kind of all the questions, Anthony, that we've got that have come in. We kind of, to respect everybody's time, if there's any more questions that come in, we'll make sure to forward those to you and get those over to you. So again, thank you so much for your time today. Lots of really good information there, and we appreciate everybody's time. And like I say, if there's any more questions, I'll get those over to you, Anthony. So thanks again. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
You bet. So what I'll do now, I'll go over to Amanda, and we'll just wind things up here for you today.
All right. Real quick, just in case you're not aware, all of our webinars can be found out on our YouTube channel. This is a great way if you missed part of the presentation or you want to go back and see what else we've done for technical presentations in the past. Go out to YouTube and search Engine Builders Association and you will find us there. Make sure to hit that subscribe button so you get notified whenever we post new videos. And typically takes me a few days to get the new webinars up there, but they will be there soon. Lastly, when you go to leave today, there will be a survey that pops up. Please take a moment and fill it out. Let us know how we're doing. There's also a spot in there to ask any additional questions you may have either for Anthony or for us here at AERA. You can plug those in there and we will get those answered for you. And it's also a great opportunity to let us know what you'd like to see. We're always looking for ideas. Our goal is to bring you webinars with content you would like. So thank you everybody for taking time out of what we know is a very busy day to attend. We truly appreciate it. If you need to contact anyone at AERA, you can reach us at 815-526-7600, or feel free to email either Rob or myself. Our email addresses are there. If we can't answer your question, we'll get it passed along to somebody who can. So we hope you guys all have a great rest of your week, and thanks again.